hour of your precious time to sit here and listen to me share some thoughts about marketing. So you can type it in the chat box or in the answer sheet, because I just want to make sure that we meet your expectations for today. All right, I'm not seeing anything, so oops. Okay, so Sam asks, markets are time and resource intensive. How can we maximize return? I think that is, I will be covering that and hopefully being able to help you understand um, how to get the most out of your, first of all, to choose what markets might be good or give you some ideas on that, but then also how can you get the most return or coming up with a market strategy for those. Okay. So Eddie says he wants to know more about selling his products. I want to know about how to grow my business from Sean. Nancy said, I want to improve my marketing skills as a newer shiitake mushroom grower. Okay, great. And as a new farmer, um, oops. Christine says, as a new farmer, trying to learn as much as possible to be profitable. Keishia says, new to starting a business after being in corporate life for 30 years. Um, Robin, to continue to grow my business, get the biggest bang for my buck when it comes to my time. Um, so, Ian, why not? Knowledge is power. Learn things I don't know, be able to fix things we don't even know we're doing wrong. Great philosophy, Ian. I attend things just for the sake of trying to learn some nuggets from each one's, or if I can. If I've learned something that's, I feel that's beneficial. Jennifer says, shares, I work with local businesses, want to assist them the best I can. My partner and I are starting a farm operation and working to develop a business plan and strategy. So great. So I don't think, so I think I've kind of hit the mark with this one. That's always good to hear. And I think so. I'm on what I share will be helpful. And of course, you can always, um, ask some questions as we go along and be able to help you out that way. Or we'll be able to, I will be happy to answer, or Lindsay for that matter, to answer the questions that you may come up afterwards. So, uh, you know, it it's all of you, I think, appreciate this mindset. Starting a farm and tend to be more of a, sounds like more direct marketing, so that you kind of understand that there needs to be, you need to find a home for your product. And but even if you were thinking about being a wholesale producer, and somebody else is finding that home for you, you still need to have that intermediary. So the 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 mindset that you need to be thinking about is I need to, no matter what I um, produce and how much, I need to find a home for most of it. Likely you're not going to find a home for all of it. Um, so that's, the push is that, and honestly, that's where farming for farmers that love farming, that's where your heart is that you want to grow things, you want to care for things, that's where your heart is. So you can produce it and you can kind of push it out, but what you also need to be thinking about, and it's not necessarily easy and it might not always be the answer you want to hear is is the products that I want to produce or am producing, is there a home for it? Is there a demand for what I want to produce? And there are a lot of factors as to why you produce what you produce. Obviously, it's your interest. But equally important, it's your resources. It's your time and talent that you have to produce a particular crop or crops. Um, but and that's wonderful and good, but you also need to do an honest assessment with yourself. Is that this is what I love to do, but is the market flooded, or is there really ultimately a market for this product, or do I need to change and rethink my business, and what I grow can maybe still grow it, but think of it in a different way and add value to it in some way, such as possibly, the example here is agritourism. So for those that are starting out, I would say that one of the things I would encourage you and ultimately challenge you to think about is who is your customer, uh, and not be superficial about this. Really take some time to think about it. But even for those that have been farming for a little while, you may initially have thought of and think about who your customer is. But you too, I would challenge to go back and think about, well, who is my customer, or more importantly, getting to the point is trying to get the biggest bang for your buck, um, through your market channels. you know if you have a better understanding uh, of who your customer is, you'll be able to you'll be able to, instead of taking a shotgun approach to your marketing, you're going to be able to do more of a rifle approach, because you're now focused and have a better sense of who your customer is, and you'll be able to focus more uh, on them rather than taking the shotgun approach. One quote that's from one of my colleagues, I believe from the University of Maryland, is that if you don't know your customer, you don't know your business. And I fully believe that. Okay, and maybe that's not totally accurate, because, but knowing your customer is going to really have a big impact on your business, and how hard you have to work at moving and selling your products. So you've got kind of the demographic side of things you can look at, but then also you've got the psychographic, the lifestyle things, um, you know, activities and interests, opinions and values, and their use behaviors. Where do they buy, and why do they buy what they do? So at the bottom is kind of a target profile example that you can think about, but it could your target profile will be a little bit different. So to help you with this is that there are resources out there. I just stumbled, after doing some research and looking on the internet, found this one from HubSpot. The reason I chose is I think it kind of gets to the previous slide of the things that particularly, more of the psychographic part of it for sure, but also the demographic too, of the things that you should be interested or thinking about when you're trying to come up with your target audience. So, thinking about their use behaviors, how, when, and why do the customers use your products, or they buy the products that that you wish to sell. Think of in terms of what, and particularly with direct marketing, what about using, and again, maybe you can think a little bit more about a farmer's market, is what about using your product or service brings customer joy? Um, you know, Something that leaps to my mind, and done some presentations on marketing cut flowers. Cut flowers are joyful, but for fruits and vegetables, milk and other products, it could be joyful from their perspective. somewhat of a hypothesis is that they feel joyful because they're supporting a local farmer. But what else? What else could make their interaction with you joyful? What kind of service? Are they expecting any kind of service? Many people or some of your customers, if that's what you are kind of um, leaning towards, yes, you're selling a product, but you're also selling a service as well. Because if you're growing or have some products that people may not be as familiar with using in the preparation of a meal or as part of their meal, you should be prepared to be able to give them ideas and suggestions on how they might use that. Maybe have some printed material on how they might incorporate some of the things that you have and are growing and have at the farmers market or whatever, of how they can use it in preparation of a meal. Consequently, something that you could do to help it joyful could be also potentially frustrating if you don't have kind of that service mind of thinking about how can I help my customers better understand how to use the products I'm making available to them and sell. And then, what are you going to, what talking points are you going to have in communicating with your customers? You want to be able to, think of it as, the elevator speech, for your farm business or for the products that you grow. So somebody's interested in something, a particular thing you have at a farmer's market, will have some type of a elevator speech around that product so that you'll be able to um, help them better understand and entice them to think about it and to try it. And something to bring this home a little bit more is that if what I've said so far, not the investigation research part, but definitely the customer profile or interacting with your customers is not your cup of tea or makes you uncomfortable, then be honest with yourself. Direct marketing may not be for you, or think about how you can change it so that you can have some comfort. If there's somebody that is involved with the farm business that is more of a enjoys interacting with people and so on, then maybe you need to bring them in and they can help them more on the true direct marketing side of the business, because they enjoy interacting with people. And if you see the potential in somebody, either recruit or coach them so that maybe they become that person or part of the team that helps to market and sell your products. So it real about boils the market potential. Really, need to be thinking about these things is what will help determine the market potential. And it's going to be dictated by the two biggies, and we'll talk about them in a minute here. Is this, between wholesale and retail. Okay. The geographic area for retail potentially could be a lot smaller, although I do know of farmers that live in the mid and upper Hudson Valley that routinely go to farmers markets in New York City because that's where they can make the money. They can charge more for the products that they're going to take down there than they can in farmers markets or retail outlets up here. So, but the point being is that you need to define the retail or the market area. It could be within your no within your county, or as the example, it could be Eastern New York or something like that. How far are you willing to travel to be able to sell your product? And then what's going to influence that is the drive time. But you know, it's it's a risk and reward. Or the reward is just to drive farther and to be able to charge more, it's going to be uh, worth it. So think about it, and where you live. It might not be somebody may not be able to get that market the market potential that you expect, and be able to when we're talking about market potential is what do you expect to make from that product, or what do you need to make from your marketing activities. So if locally you don't have the people, or that the people, because you've done your research, can't really afford to pay as much as some other areas which you might be able to go to. That's all of these things are going to have an impact on what the market potential is for, and ultimately, what you need to make as income to obviously support your farm, but also to live on, either wholly, all of your, the farm is your sole source of income for your family, or if it's supplementing, you need to have a good idea, understanding of what income the farm needs to generate in order to supplement your family living. So wholesale versus direct marketing. Wholesale for many years was kind of a dirty word. That thinking that the big bad intermediaries were forcing farmers to take be price takers, and in wholesale that can, to some extent, even at whatever level you're at, it is kind of the case is that the wholesale market is going to it does have a lot more sensitivity in it as to what you are able to charge for your product than on the retail side of things. So it is more efficiency focused, in that there's more belt tightening, you might say, that has to take place. That if you are going to be, especially if you're thinking totally or highly wholesale market driven, then you need to be very scrutinizing and evaluating very closely the the um, the efficiency of your farm business, so that because that's you have to, since you're not being able to pass on and be able to have a little bit more say in what you charge for your product, then the efficiency you need to gain efficiencies in the production of your products, which for small scale farms is kind of difficult, because small scale farming does not allow itself um, to be as efficient in general, to be able to, as a larger scale, or middle and large scale farms, which can rely on more mechanization, so on and so forth, that a wholesale farm is going to be able to do. The pros of it is that you can close the door at 5 o'clock, as it says here, and not have to meet the necessarily the needs of the especially a retail customer. That's not always true. Wholesale, as far as I'm concerned, has a breadth and depth of who your wholesale customer is. I define it as someone who is some sort of an intermediary between you and the consumer that's going to use that product. So, if you're selling to a restaurant, for example, I consider that a wholesale customer. Now, they are your customer, so that they may call up and say, "Hey, we ran out of your tomatoes at at 8 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock at night. We need you to deliver more tomatoes." Well, and that's fine. That hopefully you can do that. That gets back to the customer service and service aspect of your business. As it says here, lower margins. You got to that your wholesale customer may not be as forgiving as your retail customer, especially if you explain to them that that ugly tomato is tastes just as good as this picture perfect tomato that they may find at another farmer's market stall close by. So there are going to, so wholesale has its unique circumstances, but direct marketing, you're going to be a price maker to extent. You, you can at least hopefully charge as much as the other people in the market can, um, and maybe after establishment be able to charge even a little bit more because you develop a customer following. Um, there are going to be higher margins, but there are going to be higher marketing costs. With wholesale, basically the you're not your distribution of the product is going to be a lot more limited, meaning there's going to be some cost savings there. Whereas, with think of it in terms of direct marketing, you're the wholesaler and the marketer of this product. So there are going to be more costs involved as all the way through, which I hope that you will think about, and we'll talk about in a minute, that you will be able to capture all those costs and be able to price your products accordingly. So here are some direct marketing channels that I'm sure most or all of you are aware of. I'm not going to elaborate on them. You know, they each have their pluses and minuses, and we could spend a whole um, uh, uh, webinar or Zoom meeting just talking about the pluses and minuses of those. There is a publication that a colleague of ours, Matt LaRue, developed many years ago that does kind of a market channel analysis. I can let Lindsay, I'll share the slides with Lindsay, and that will be one of the resources that you could use to help you kind of figure out what market channels, either retail, direct marketing, or wholesale, that you might want to think about. But wholesale marketing, this is really, I've used some resources to kind of prepare the slide, and it's kind of thinking maybe a little bit above what I would even think of what this is more of the traditional side of wholesale market channels. But as I said, at any time you can think of a wholesale market that you might have as any, in my mind, and as I define it, is 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 any intermediary. It could be a restaurant. It could be another farmer, for that matter, that you're selling to. They have a farm stand, and they want to buy your products. It could be another CSA potentially, or selling to a farmer that has CSA that wants to be able to supplement their CSA. So, and there are wholesale um, uh, models that we have. We have food hubs, we have aggregation type of systems in New York State, in the Hudson Valley, that will aggregate farm products, and then the one that comes to mind is that moves it into the city, New York City, and the advantage that they provide to a farmer is that trying to get into some of the food services or the types of markets in New York City, unless you're able to sell a pallet or many pallets of a product to them, they're not going to be interested. And that's what a food aggregator or a food hub is going to be able to do. Or same way with contracts and institutions. Many institutions aren't interested in buying a box of tomatoes. They may be interested in buying a pallet of tomatoes at a time or something like that. So food aggregators and other things will be able to assist with that. And that's where I think of wholesale marketing channels. I mean, could you grow to the point where you can kind of fill and do some of these things? Absolutely. Could you form a co-op and do it, and a group of farmers be able to aggregate and sell into some of these larger institutions or markets? Absolutely. But is starting out and starting small, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But that does not mean that wholesale marketing cannot be something that you think about. So these are the things to think about. Um, for 6 factors of performance. You know, this is kind of, I think, lays it out very well, and it touches on both what I would consider both the wholesale retail side of things. Restaurant, distributor. I wouldn't necessarily, if I rephrase it, may not necessarily be high volume. Again, if it's in more of an aggregator type of situation, they may be low or medium volume that they're willing to take. I think they're going to be, obviously looking for quality, uniformity, and also if there's a need, they need to have a niche to fill. Um, you Pause for a moment, talk a little bit about servicing your wholesale customers is going to be as equally as important as servicing your retail customers, and it may be also what for a distributor or your wholesale markets is that you're going to be a troubleshooter. They may have an issue or a problem, and if you're the one that can help them figure out and be able to uh, help them figure out what that problem, how to troubleshoot that problem, you're going to be their go-to farm or going to gain some priority with them. So with uh, your retail, customer service is important, but don't forget that um, service to providing service to your wholesale markets is equally important. Communicating and interacting with them to learn what their needs are and what issues they have will be important so that you can hopefully be somebody or a farm that can help them solve those problems as they arise. So, this, and I think this is a good visual in that uh, for multiple reasons is that, and what it really boils down to is that what is your steady channel? It could be the retail, and it could be more of the retail side. It could be CSA. It could be farmers markets. It could be other things. We could flip flop and change this up. But I think the take home message with this is that you have product to produce. Okay, you need to strategize and think about what do I need for kind of my steady markets, and it could be your CSA, but it could also be your farmers market. But what is kind of and it could be some wholesale accounts as well, but what could be my variable accounts? They're kind of my second priority, but they're going to be important because we don't know how well you're going to produce. If you can figure out that based upon you plant this year, what you do have an idea of your expected yields, but is that what you're actually going to generate? I hope you're all pleasantly surprised, and you have more. You produce more than what you expected. So that's where this variable channel is going to come in. Unfortunately, depending on your geographic area, everybody may be having a good year with something. But thinking about that variable channel and establishing connections with potential customers, whether it be retail or wholesale, ahead of time is going to be important, and maybe think, and also to help you strategize your production practices and plantings and so on for this year. But also, this is something that needs to be refined and change from year to year. Maybe what was a variable channel this year may become a steady channel next year, and so this variable channel didn't work out this year. What do I need to be thinking about for next year? So establishing um, price boundaries, and I want to introduce this for initially to kind of give you an idea of what you need to be thinking about. And it's the first thing you need to be thinking about is the floor. Is my break-even cost? You um, and it's not necessarily what you're willing to sell it for, because ideally what you're willing to sell it for is your break-even cost, and it's and there may be reasons why you want to sell it at your break-even cost, and we'll talk about the reasons why in a few minutes. But that the floor is the break even, but the ceiling is what is the maximum amount that the customer is willing to pay, and that's your margin, and that's your price flexibility. So if you're, for sake of argument, is and well, let me go on because we'll talk more about this in the next example. Okay, so let's say that you're producing cheese, okay? And this is what I call the 7-line market strategy, because um, for many, uh, in my mind, is that it's easy to be focused on what does it cost me to produce that pound of cheese, or cheese, that wheel of cheese, um, and not necessarily be thinking about all of the other associated expenses that I have, and actually to the point where I'm handing a pound of cheese to someone at a farmer's market, and they're taking it home to consume it. So I think of it in terms of there are 7 things that we need to be um, concerned about. Of course, we need to be thinking about production. We're buying milk, and now we're turning that milk into cheese. There are going to be production costs. We have the cost of the milk. We have the which is pretty much the production cost. But for others, if you're going to make salsa, if you're going to do whatever, you're going to buy tomatoes, you're going to buy other things, and you're going to turn. That's your production costs, associated with that. We have the processing costs. We got to be able to. Now we're going to turn that milk into cheese. We have associated processing costs with that. We got to let people know that, hey, we've got cheese to sell, and start advertising and promoting our product. Distribution. Okay, we're going to sell it. Go to our farmers markets in our area, and we're going to sell it. Okay, that cheese doesn't um, uh, magically get cut into 1 pound block parts or whatever, and it doesn't magically show up at a farmer's market all by itself. We know it takes time for us to get it into coolers. We got to schlep those coolers into our vehicle. We got to travel to the farmer's market, so on and so forth. But that's true especially from a retail point of view, even a wholesale point of view, is that you got to do potentially some packaging and some transportation of that product to that end destination. And then we've got the sale. We especially from a marketing point of view, is that especially farmers market. Okay, we've got farmers market costs. We've got to buy and have a tent. We've got insurance. There's a lot of things that we got involved that when we're set up at the farmers market that costs us to be there. So then we always should be thinking about profit in mind. What are we've made this investment and have costs associated with this investment. What kind of profit do we want to recoup from our investment of our time and labor into producing and selling this product? And in this case, we're saying we want a 35% margin. And so ultimately, that's how we come up with it. Kind of, can we, is this our floor? Well, the profit we can take out or adjust, but you could conceivably play a little bit. If we go back to this, what is our floor? What is our break-even cost? I would argue it's these things from the sale down, but we can play with the profit. But if we want to keep in mind that we're making money to be able to support ourselves financially, then we need to be thinking about our profit. So, but you can choose, think about our pricing strategy. And do you, and this is something to think about in your overall market strategy is that what price strategy am I going to use for the particular market or the time that I enter that market. You may want to think about penetration. If you're entering a fairly saturated market, then yes, you may want to make the conscious decision of deciding to be not be price sensitive and not charge more for your product, but maybe charge a little bit less. But at least charge the same. As it says here, warning small lacking in economies of sales. Um, I was, but you're trying to penetrate a market. Competitive. You know, definitely want to charge as much as the market will allow. Cost plus. You're trying to break even. You're breaking even plus your desired value. Your your desired margin value, and then premium. As you get into a market and you become established and you become kind of the go-to farm in a particular market, I don't care what it is, then you will be able to, you're providing value to your customers, and in turn you should recoup from them financially some of that value because they appreciate and recognize that you're providing high quality product to them that has value to them and they're willing to pay for it. So, you know, kind of bringing this home to some extent is that, if you need to know your total cost. You also need to be thinking about, I need to make money on what I sell. Or yes, you can have loss leaders, okay, and that where you kind of break even or maybe lose money on something, especially if you're selling a variety of products. But overall, when you go to a farmer's market or on a weekly basis, you should be making a profit. And so thinking about this in terms of, okay, I might lose a little bit of money here, but I'm going to make it. And think about what are your value or premium products that you have and are going to be offering at a farmer's market or at your roadside stand. Or CSAs are a little bit different, but even still, even on a wholesale basis, that pricing strategy still fits with wholesale. You might offer something that's a little bit um, as more of at a lower level. And let's go back a few slides here. You think a bit this from a steady channel. If you've got, if the wholesaler, if you're long on something, then not only is it a variable channel, but maybe you want to be, because you can might be hopefully make it up on volume a little bit, is to think about charging a little bit less for some of the products that you are growing or have for sale. So, throwing a lot at you. I realize that, and a lot to digest here, but hopefully can think about it. We'll provide you some resources and start to think about your marketing strategy and your pricing strategy for your farm business. Want to also throw this in here or talk about this a little bit as well is your digital infrastructure, business to business or business to consumer. This is something else, especially either way, really, but particularly business to business. This is something that you might be able to set yourself up um, uh, uh, differently than some of your competitors if you're willing to take online orders um, for some of your or they may be demanding that you do this, or you might be missing some opportunities for some potential wholesale customers if you're willing to or not to take some online ordering for your products, or maybe use their portals as well to let them know that you've got this available as well. So I think it is something that can help make your business more efficient as well. When it comes to business to consumer, it's going to be using the social media and other things to tell your story. Either way, it's going to be important, but certainly when you're want to talk directly to your and reach your consumer directly, you know, social media is going to be something that you really need to take advantage of and use. Yes, it takes time, but hopefully it gets back to that marketing and talking about your marketing costs. If you're building in a little bit of your time or someone's time to keep your social media current, then you are hopefully paying yourself for that time to be able to do the storytelling. And then, um, risk management, we want to think about, just let you know is that there are some things for small and beginning farmers and for especially crop farmers. It might be too late for this year, but food for thought is the fact that there are some crop insurance uh, um, uh, products available that you might be able to take advantage of. The one that comes to mind that is available is whole farm revenue protection, meaning that you can buy insurance to be able to protect farm revenue for your business. And it can be, and the revenue protection is not only for it is kind of multiple perils. It's going to be production risk for sure, so that if you don't have as much crop to sell, it will so therefore your revenue drops because of that. It can help, but also if there's a change in prices, if you don't, for whatever reason, you're not able to earn as much income, um, then you're able to um, the insurance can make up some of the difference with that. So something to think about. But there are some other things to think about, as it says right down here as well, that I like to think about. This is not to put all your eggs in one basket. Not only rely on farmers markets as your only source of marketing. Some wholesale markets, maybe a CSA, some other things. Try to diversify your markets will be helpful. And because if we have, for example, a weekend like we had 2 years ago in the fall, where it rained every weekend, you most likely chances are good you're going to see a decrease in market, the revenue from farmers market. But if you have some other revenues, such as a CSA or something else, you're able to spread your marketing risks out over several, instead of just putting your eggs in one basket as far as one market avenue. So checklist. Are you ready? Have you defined your personal lifestyle? Have you identified your customer? What channels have you selected? You need and this takes time, understood, but you really need to know the cost of production and marketing for your products. And once you know that, then that's going to help you determine what market channels you might want to increase or to start in, or is there an opportunity to increase your how much you charge in those market channels, and also think about risk management. So here's a list of some resources that we've I've put together and we can share with you. And I'll make sure Lindsay gets this, and also I'll put the market channel assessment in that. And so that's the end of my